Hello everyone, this is Michael from BlueSkyBio. In this training tutorial, we are continuing to go through BlueSky Plan version 4.13 process flow, emphasizing the new features and functionality now included in BlueSky Plan. If you haven't yet seen the preceding video, including loading the information and the fully automatic process of segmenting the CT data and aligning to the optical scans, I highly recommend that you check the preceding video. It also points out the relevant new features and functionality, including the ability to add teeth, delete teeth, completely automatic segment, the CT teeth, the bone, the airways, and it talks about the advantages of using the true anatomical mechanics, the full patient anatomy when designing the digital aligner tooth setup, and its effects on reducing and eliminating mid-course refinement cases. This video will focus on the aligner digital tooth setup, controlling the teeth movements, and all the new features and functionalities that we have connected to that. Additional follow-up videos will demonstrate advanced functionalities such as designing and exporting the aligners directly from the software, creating an aligner trim curve, and of course, all the export options to add a base for vertical printing, to emboss and engrave text on the model or on the aligners, the ability to order aligners with a click, and the ability to transfer the case to remote monitoring with a click. Okay, so what we see in front of us is obviously the 3D view. We have the jaw segmented, we have our optical scans aligned to it, we have the CT teeth segmented, and we have our airway segmentation as well. Going across the bottom, we have our 2D CT slices and the sliders next to each one that allows us to slide through the relevant slices. We can also see that when we click on a particular tooth or a particular surface, the CT slices jump and adjust themselves accordingly to show us that object in the relevant CT slices. Now the panel on the right side of the screen seems a bit busy and full, but we're going to break it down, explain the functionality, and really show how simple and easy to use it is. So the goal of the step that we're looking at right now is to define what we want the final teeth positioning to be for the patient. We have simple and quick tools to use for those simple and straightforward cases, and then we have more robust and powerful tools that you can take advantage of for those more complicated cases as well. So a particular tooth or particular jaw can be activated simply by left clicking on the tooth, and the relevant tooth and the relevant jaw will become active. We also have the ability to use the buttons in the top of the panel to activate the relevant jaw, and we have the toggle button to show or hide the opposing arch. We could see that activating the collisions checkbox turns on the visibility of collisions between different teeth. The buttons that we have here allow the user to toggle the mandibular jaw positioning between the CT positioning, which reflects the positioning of the mandible at the time the CT was taken, and the occlusal positioning. We have other checkboxes where the user could toggle on and off IPR indicators, diastema indicators, and we'll see these as we move the teeth around. The visibility of the CT teeth, when we turn off that option, we see just the teeth from the optical scan. We have the jawbone. We have the airways. And we have the teeth midlines. We could see that every tooth has the vertical axis going through the tooth, which is also indicated by the orange vertical stripe, and that is to where the widget gets aligned. And we have our green mesial distal stripes on each tooth as well. I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom for a second. We have here a button for adjust midlines. If for whatever reason you feel like the midline of the tooth is not aligned properly, just go ahead and click adjust midlines. The widget is now active, but the widget will not move the tooth, as we will see shortly. The widget will reposition the midline accordingly. Once you finish making modification, deactivate the adjust midline button. I'm going to undo that action. And now we're going to take a look at the transparency section, which may or may not be collapsed for you, but you can see very simply that we have visualization sliders that control the opacity of what you're taking a look at. So if you like better visualization of the optical scans, you could go ahead and adjust that. You could adjust the transparency of the segmented CT jaw, and you could adjust the transparency of the segmented airways. We could see that the software presents a curve on top of the teeth, and this provides a quick and convenient way to generate an initial digital tooth setup, which you could then tweak afterwards. Before we discuss the different functionality of snapping the teeth, let's just discuss the functionality to edit the curve if needed. If you're happy with the curve placement, everything is fine. If you'd like to modify the curve placement, then you have the tools right here. You could click Edit Curve. You could just grab and drag any of the nodes to adjust the curve shape accordingly. We have the ability to move points symmetrically, which means that if you move a node on one side of the jaw, it moves the node on the opposing side of the jaw at equal distance. You have the ability to rotate the curve. And if you've made changes but you want to reset to the original curve, simply click Reset Curve. So you have the checkboxes here to move points symmetrically and to show or hide the curve. So when you snap the teeth to the curve, you're controlling both the positioning of the teeth along the curve as well as the height of the teeth for the intrusion and extrusion. So snapping the teeth could be done with both jaws visible on screen or just with a single jaw visible on screen. But for demonstration purposes, let's take a look at it this way. We have the options of leveling the teeth to the curve, leveling the teeth to the opposing teeth, or the option of no leveling and just snapping the teeth to align to the curve. So once the relevant intrusion extrusion option is selected in the top row of buttons here, simply click the button Snap All Teeth. So we could see the results of snapping the teeth to the curve. We could see the collisions indicated in red. We could see the IPR information. If we want to modify, let's take a look now at level to opposing teeth and click Snap All Teeth. And we could see that snapping the teeth using the level to opposing teeth has removed almost entirely the collisions with the opposing arch. So if we want, for example, we could first activate the maxilla, snap the maxilla to the curve, and then activate the mandible and snap the mandible to the opposing teeth. When snapping teeth to the curve, we have the default settings visible on screen right here. These settings can be changed on a case-by-case basis just by changing them directly on screen, as we see now. If you'd like to change the default settings for all future cases, simply go into Properties. We could do this by selecting Tools, Preferences, click on Orthodontics, and scrolling down, we could see the different settings for snapping the teeth to curve and snapping the teeth to the opposing arch. So if you'd like to change the default settings for future cases, you could do this directly here. I'd also like to point out that here we have the settings for maximum allowed IPR. So you could see that when we snap the teeth to the curve, the teeth were aligned to the curve with a certain amount of allowed IPR. If you like to reduce the amount of IPR, you could do so for future cases or for all cases directly here. Keep in mind that reducing the amount of allowed IPR might require a broader curve or create situations where not all the teeth will fit. Okay, so we could reactivate our CT teeth, for example, our teeth midlines. We could review the teeth positioning and click on any particular tooth to activate it and fine-tune or adjust the positioning of the particular tooth. Now, since the aligner digital tooth setup is being planned with full anatomical data, what we'll do is place the widget on each individual tooth based on the volume calculated for that particular tooth, so that the widget placement most accurately and correctly reflects the true biomechanics of how that tooth is going to move and the pressure the aligner is going to be applying to the tooth for that particular tooth with that particular root shape and how the tooth is going to be moving. Now the table that we have here shows the tooth movement for any particular tooth. Now besides just reflecting the movement that's done in the 3D view, you're able to use the up-down arrows to actually move the tooth as well as entering a particular value into the relevant box. In addition to being able to control a tooth movement from the widget or from the values within the box or the up-down arrows. You're also able to use the arrow keys on your keyboard to nudge the tooth in a particular direction in 0.05 millimeter increments. We have also added the ability to multi-select several teeth at once. So you can left click to activate a particular tooth, hold down the shift key, and left click to multi-select. Once you have several teeth selected together, you could use the widget to move those teeth as one unit. We've added the checkbox to transfer movement locally. The best way to explain this is just to demonstrate. When the checkbox is not checked and I move multiple teeth together, then they move together as one unit, with the teeth maintaining their relative positioning to one another. When I check the checkbox, transfer movement locally, and I move multiple teeth together, we could see that the relevant positioning is not maintained, but rather they're all moving as individual teeth in the relevant direction. We have a drop down here for limits monthly, bi-weekly, and weekly. What this does, in order to understand, we have in Tools, Preferences, a chart for tooth movement limits. And what this does is for every type of movement, for every tooth, it shows the maximum allow the movement in a given time frame. We have the settings for the maxilla and the mandible. Now, if you feel that's clinically acceptable to move the teeth faster, then you can modify the current limits. You can modify each individual limit, or if you decide that in general you want the teeth to move 20% faster, for example, you can modify the percentage here, click apply, and all the numbers will adjust accordingly. Reset limits resets the numbers back to the default settings. So these are the limits that are acceptable, that are deemed defaultly acceptable to move a particular tooth in a particular direction within the given time frame. So when we opened the chart, it reflected the numbers based on a monthly allowed movement, and from aligner to aligner, it will be based on that allowed movement. You could change the setting to bi-weekly if the aligners are going to be delivered every 2 weeks, and then the setting values that we saw previously will be cut in half, or weekly, and the setting values there will be cut into 25%. So what you're selecting here is essentially how often you're going to be delivering the aligners and what the movement should be from aligner to aligner. Next, we have our milestones functionality. So first, let me just reset all teeth to their initial positions before we did any snapping. Okay, now if you decide that clinically what you want to do is you want to expand the anterior teeth, then maybe move the posterior teeth, and then maybe retract the anterior teeth. So now we have fantastic functionality to enable all of this to be done. So as I mentioned earlier, you can multi-select teeth, hold down the shift key, left click, and what we're going to do now is we're going to lock. I'm going to click lock teeth, and I've locked the posterior teeth in the mandible over there. I'm going to lock the posterior teeth over here. And now what I could do is I could click snap all teeth. And now I've just expanded the anterior. The posterior teeth have not moved. Now if I want to create this as my first milestone, I simply click insert milestone. Now if I like to have the posterior teeth move as well, I could click unlock all teeth. The anterior teeth have already moved and been snapped to the curve. And then I could click snap all teeth. What's happening now is the posterior teeth are being snapped to the curve. I could click insert milestone. And then if you wanted to finalize the position of particular teeth, for example, you could go ahead and use the widget. You could use the different controls as we mentioned earlier. You could finalize the teeth position, and that creates the final step. So the final teeth positioning is automatically created as a milestone, which is why we have 3 milestones created here. We could go through and use the slider to go from milestone to milestone and see how the teeth move. The final teeth positioning is the final milestone. We have 2 buttons here. The red X will delete the particular milestone. The reset button here will remove all milestones. Now, the reset button for the milestones is different than the reset all teeth buttons. The reset all teeth buttons will reset all the teeth to their initial positioning prior to any changes. The reset milestones button will keep the final digital tooth setup, but will remove any custom created milestones. Okay, by this point we've discussed the buttons that we have here, or at least almost all of them. Unlock all teeth we discussed will unlock all teeth. Reset all teeth resets all teeth to the initial positioning prior to any modifications or adjustments. Adjust midlines, as we discussed earlier. If you feel the midline of the tooth is not properly aligned, you could click the button. The widget will be activated. It will not move the tooth. It will just move the midline. And adjust virtual teeth does the same thing. If you feel that the CT tooth is not properly aligned to the model tooth, you could just press the button and you could go ahead and adjust the positioning of the tooth relative to the tooth in the model. So just to summarize the digital tooth setup step that we're looking at right now, we have our visibility controls in the top up here. We have our snap to curve. If it's a simple or straightforward case, you could snap the teeth and then tweak the final positions. We have our chart that demonstrates both the movement of a particular tooth as well as providing an additional way of moving the tooth using the up-down arrows or by entering the relevant values. We can multi-select the teeth by activating a tooth, holding down the shift key and left-clicking to multi-select relevant teeth, and transfer movement locally affects how they move. We have our milestone functionality for those more advanced and complicated cases. And then we have some of our quick access buttons to do things like adjust the midlines, adjust the tooth, unlock all teeth, and reset all teeth. So once we've created the final teeth setup and created the relevant milestones, we could click continue to edit steps to control how the teeth move. Okay, we are now at the tooth movement step where we could affect how the teeth move. So if we look at the panel, we'll see the top sections of the panel we're already very familiar with. We have our active jaw. We have our different visibility options in terms of the mandibular positioning, in terms of what we want to see on screen. By the way, we have initial teeth positions. So now that we've created the final positions, we could toggle on and see our initial teeth positions and the differences. We have our final teeth positions. So if we slide through the various steps and we go back to one of the beginning positions and we want to see the final positions, we could toggle that on as well. And we have our midlines, our airways, and everything that we talked about earlier, as well as our different transparency settings. We're also familiar with the next section of the tooth deviations, where whichever tooth we click on and activate, it shows us the teeth movements and the relevant directions from the start position to the final position. We are still at the point where we can modify the final teeth positioning either via the widget or by entering values into the boxes, or by using the up-down arrows that we have here to modify the positioning, or by using the arrows on the keyboard to nudge the teeth in 0.05 millimeter increments. We have our transfer movement locally checkbox that we discussed and our limits as we discussed as well. So now we're going to scroll down and take a look at the different functionality particular to this relevant step, again, where we're able to control the actual teeth movements. So our steps slider show us the various steps and how the teeth are moving. We can see the teeth moving on screen, and we can see the indicator below us showing the relevant steps and what step we're up to. We're able to very easily export a video. So if we want to send a video to the patient, we could generate and send a video very easily. You could choose if you want the video to be what's visible on screen, to show both jaws separately, or to show both jaws in a bite. You also have different options of showing the CT teeth, yes or no, and showing the IPR diastema labels, yes or no. There are different options in terms of the size of the video, and custom text could be added to the video, whether you want to add the patient's name, your clinic name, whatever relevant text you want to add, you could go ahead and enter the text here and control the font size and their various formatting options. The export video option also exists at the final stages of the project, where you're able to export to the STL models or the aligners as well. So you have the option both at this point of the process flow and at the end of the process flow. So let's take a look at this chart that we have right here. So the first thing that we see is that the chart shows us the number of movement steps. For a particular tooth, right now we're looking at upper left 4, And let me just show you very quickly, if you want to change the dental notation, we have two options here, EU and US. So if you want to change that, you could go ahead and change that right there. So now if we're looking at tooth number 12, and we can see that tooth number 12, anywhere that has the green background means that tooth number 12 is moving during that step. Now, if we take a look at a couple different teeth, we could see tooth number 13, tooth number 14, all of them are moving at every step. And the question you might be thinking to yourself is why? And one of the reasons, or the reason is because we've introduced new options here as well, where you could control when a particular tooth is moving and when it's not. So throughout the particular treatment, you might have a tooth that moves across 5 steps. You might have another tooth that moves across 10 steps. And of course, you'll have teeth that move across all the steps, and which is why all the steps are there. So we have the drop down that exists right here, and you could control the teeth that move the least. Do you want those teeth to move at the beginning of the process, or do you want those teeth to move at the end of the process? Or do you want those teeth to move throughout the process and just decrease the amount that they move at each step? So we have those different options right here. We have least movement moves last, which means if a tooth is only moving 5 steps out of 15, then it will move those 5 steps at the end of the process. We have least movement move first. The tooth that moves 5 steps will move those 5 steps at the beginning of the process. And we have uniform movement, which means even though it really only needs to move over 5 steps, we're going to decrease the amount it moves each step, but it will move over the entire process. So that's what we have selected right now, uniform movement, which is why the teeth that we just took a look at are moving on all the steps. If we change the setting to, for example, to least movement move last, then we could see that the tooth we're looking at now, 14, moves over most of the steps, but now it's moving at the final steps. If we change it to least movement move first, we could see that the tooth moves at the beginning of the process. If we change it to uniform movement, then as we mentioned, the tooth will move over all steps of the process. Now, we added a new feature, same type of concept, but on an individual tooth level. So if we've selected tooth 11, we could see that tooth 11 tips and rotates. So now you could ask the question about when should the tipping happen and when should the rotating happen. So if tipping only requires 2 steps and rotating requires, let's say, the 7 steps, do you want the least movement for the tooth? Do you want the tipping that requires 2 steps to move first, to move last, or uniform movement? So we have both of these new drop downs we have added right here. The first one is regarding all the teeth sequencing. Do you want the teeth that move the least to move at the beginning, to move at the end, or to move throughout? And then we have it on the individual level. If a tooth is both tipping and extruding, when do you want those movements to be happening? Do you want the least moving first, moving last, or moving uniform movements? Now in this chart, we also have checkboxes. We have 2 columns here, one for start step and one for mandatory. So what are these used for? So we see, and now I have tooth number 9 selected. And if I go through the movements, and right now, according to the settings, I have least movement move first. So tooth number 9 is moving 2 steps. It's moving first. And now let's say I go through the steps and I see that tooth number 9 collides with tooth number 10 during the step movements. And I see that if tooth number 9 would just start moving a little bit later, then we wouldn't have that collision during the tooth movements. So very simply what I could do is if I want tooth number 9 to start moving only at step 4, I click start step for step number 4 while we're looking at tooth number 9. Tooth number 9 is active. And now tooth number 9 will only start moving at step number 4. So if I would like to delay the beginning of the movement for a particular tooth, simply make sure the relevant tooth is selected and then click the checkbox for the relevant step where you would like the tooth to start moving. The mandatory column enables us to force a particular tooth position at a particular step. So let's say, for example, we're going through the particular steps and we see that tooth number 10, when we get to step number 5, tooth number 10 collides, for example, with tooth 11 and we have significant IPR at that step. What we could do is we could just activate the relevant tooth at the relevant step, use the widget to fine-tune the positioning of that tooth. We can see the mandatory checkbox is checked automatically. And what we've dictated to the software is that tooth number 10 as step number 5 has to be in this position. Now, what's important to keep in mind is after making a change such as that, we need to click the refresh steps button. The button becomes highlighted automatically, indicating that we have to refresh the steps, because in the calculations of generating the steps, now that we've made the change that we made, it could have an influence on other teeth. It could have an influence on the number of steps. So we need to click the refresh steps button so the software could recalculate accordingly. We've also added the duplicate step functionality. So if we're going through the teeth movements and we see, okay, looks great, then we see, oh, when it gets to step number 8 and proceeds to 9 and 10, I don't really like how those teeth are moving, or I'd really like to establish that particular teeth then act differently or move in a different direction. So what we're able to do is we go to step number 8, where until that point, we are happy with the teeth movement and the teeth sequencing, and we click duplicate step. Now, step number 9 and step number 8 are duplicates of each other. We were happy with how the teeth were moving until step number 8, and now we want to dictate particular teeth into particular positions for step number 9. So we could go to step number 9, move the teeth into the desired positions, and now what we've done, 9, we've established mandatory positions for the relevant teeth. Once again, refresh steps is active. We need to click the button to refresh the calculations. And now the teeth movement will work the same way until step number 8, as we were happy with the teeth movement until that step. Now the teeth will continue to move in order to establish the positions that we dictated manually. So again, to summarize, duplicate steps allows us to duplicate a particular step. The teeth will be in the exact same position between the previous step and the new step, but in the new step, we can now manually adjust the desired positions of the teeth or of particular teeth. All the other teeth will stay in the same position, and the software will then, after we click refresh steps, move the teeth that we adjusted manually to the adjusted positions, after which all the teeth will continue moving to the final desired positions. You could think of the duplicate step functionality as the ability to create a milestone modification during the teeth movement, which is why that we see we have a new orange step indicating a milestone has been created. If you've made a bunch of changes to the teeth sequencing and now you've decided that you want to restore the original proposal of the software, you could click the button right here to restore to the defaults. Would you like to delete created milestones? And now we've restored to the original proposal that we had when we got to this step. Finally, if you click on the step details button, you could see a summary of all the teeth, how they move for the particular selected step. So now we've discussed the different capabilities and functionalities that we have in the teeth movement step. For simpler, more straightforward cases, you might not be touching any of these functionalities, but you could see that we've built in a tremendous amount of powerful features and functionalities to be able to control and fine-tune the teeth movements and the teeth sequencing to really give the user full control of every aspect of how the teeth could be moving. Since we have the full anatomical information, both in terms of the CT roots and in terms of the bone, you could go through the step sequencing and you could see full information, not just crown information, but full information about the patient's full anatomy at every step of the movement process. The button that we have on the bottom is continue to export. We could see that above the button, we have various options about the next steps that we want to take. If we would like to add attachments, we could check the checkbox for add buttons, and we have different options about different buttons and different size buttons that could be added. We have automatic button positioning, and we also have different options about how to continue in terms of the export. Do you want to export the models only and create the aligners based on the printed models? Do you want to design printable aligners where you design the aligners directly in the software and export the STL file for direct aligner printing? BlueSky Plan has FDA approval to design printable aligners. And the last option that we have here is design aligner trim curve. So if you're going to be exporting the models, but you would like to generate an aligner trim curve for a milling machine to trim those aligners, you could select the option to design an aligner trim curve. You'll be exporting the models as well as the configuration file for the trim to automatically trim those aligners.